reason why the norm of romantic love as being the only way in which you can achieve fulfillment in your life, the only way that you can access the good life, is that it frankly is truly unattainable to some degree. But secondly, we think that it has created a systemic effect of harms that end up impacting individuals and their ability to actually achieve a good life. We think the pervasiveness and the way in which we treat each other is almost always stemmed back from this idea of how can we best achieve romantic love, because our society tells us that romantic love is happiness, that the two are one thing, and that is the only way in which we can live a good life. Before I get into my speech today, I think it's important to understand what the model and the framework is of this debate. First, whenever we talk about opposing this as a norm, we think that what we mean is this in two ways. First, as an individual action, and that we would not, as individuals in this room, view this romantic love as the only way in which we can achieve joy. But secondly, as a society, and saying that this is a norm we should shun, and this is a norm that we believe we should live without. In the same way that this debate could function as like this house would prefer a society in which romantic love did not exist, that is essentially what we think we're arguing in this debate. But secondly, let's talk about what we mean whenever we talk specifically about romantic love. We think it's in two different ways, right? We think there's a sexual component. These are people who you want to have as partners, whether for life or for a single night. But there's always this difference between romantic love and other forms of love. We think that other forms of love are better, and we would still have them in our society, such as having filial love with your parents or your siblings, having platonic love with your friends. Lastly, what we think the framework of this debate is and how it ought to be adjudicated panel. We think we need to talk about what will give you a fulfilled life and what will allow you to access the good life in the best possible way, not only for yourself as an individual, but also for the ramifications it has for your society. We think, on our side of the house, that that society is one that is less toxic and that focuses on how individuals act by themselves, not how they are defined by other people. 2 points in this debate. First, talking about the cult of love, and then secondly, talking about what we think will happen in a society that opposes romantic love. First, into the cult of love. First thing under this, we believe it is pervasive. We think it is everywhere in our society that you are told that romantic love is something that you should seek and that it's important to have self-worth. We think it is in everything from film, books, ads, and social media. It is in every aspect of our society. It is entrenched. And all of this is because it is trying to tell you, this is the way to happiness, this is how we're going to sell you happiness, but in reality they're not trying to sell you happiness, they're just trying to sell you this concept of romantic love and why it should be so important. The problem, as I previously stated, is that we are now essentially making romantic love and happiness mean one thing in our society, and there are two things that can never be split. But secondly, talking about the necessity of attraction whenever we are talking about romantic love. We think that other love tends to disregard your physical attributes. You probably love your parents regardless of how they look, and you probably love your siblings regardless of how they look. Whenever you choose your friends, I really truly hope that you are not choosing it on the basis of how attractive they are, but on their wit or on their kindness. We think that that kind of love ends up being more fulfilling, not only for the people in which that love is being exchanged, but also for the individuals, because that means that you do not have to prove yourself or prove your worth. Simply what it is who you are intrinsically is what matters. The problem is that there's always going to be a competition to be seen as worthy, as beautiful, and as attraction whenever you have romantic love as a priority. You're always going to define yourself by how others measure your appearance. I think all of us, to some degree in this debate, have faced someone who has rated you or has rated other people as being like, oh, that's a 9, that's a dime piece, that's a 1 out of 10. And the thing is that is the way in which we talk about other people in our society, because we view appearance as being so necessary because of this cult of love. We think the problems with this is that it leads to a lot of terrible social norms that end up affecting individuals and our societies writ large. We think some of this looks like toxic masculinity, which in many ways is simply just men trying to prove that they're going to be the most aggressive partner and they're going to be the best partner for you by embodying what this ideal masculine form ought to be. We think it looks like a lot of cases like internalized misogyny, where women think that by internalizing misogyny and internalizing the patriarchy, they're going to win over men who want to pay attention to them and are going to be attracted to them now. We think these are two examples of how this works. But I think secondly, we think it means that you're always focused on others and how they define you versus how you define yourself. We think this leads to things in those relationships, not just in society, like codependency, like feeling that you constantly have to check in with your partner and feeling like you have some obligation to their happiness over your own. Whenever people talk about what pleases them in a relationship, oftentimes they say, what gives me joy is pleasing the other person. The problem is we don't think that's a universal standard, and that oftentimes what that means is you're always putting yourself underneath your partner or underneath this other person. In a lot of cases, this means like doing things like not prioritizing your school or not prioritizing your career, but instead making massive sacrifices to be able to please your partner, because your society has told you that if you do not have a romantic partner, you are worthless. I will take a POI if anyone has one. Yes, talk back.
Why are the things you just said necessarily connected to this picture that you're posing?
A lot of it, though, is because, and I kind of previewed this, right? Romantic love operates in a functionally different way because it is one in which you are trying to find people which you are compatible with. And our society has said that your compatibility is based on attractiveness, it is based on these things that are appearance-based, not intrinsic. We don't think that means that you can never ever have a fulfilling relationship with someone that is not based on appearance, but we think that in general, whenever we're talking about romantic love, those are the key tenets of romantic love. And often people are usually shamed if they date someone that is not viewed as attractive or not viewed in their league. But secondly, talking about what the expectation of romantic love is. No one wants to be seen as a failure, and so everyone believes that they have to have a romantic partner at some point in their life. We think we see this with things like the spinster narrative, but what this leads to is things like the incel mentality, which says, I deserve to have a romantic partner, I deserve to have a girlfriend or a wife or a boyfriend or a partner. And we think that what that does is it creates this weird idea that you are always going to have this thing that you deserve in order to be viewed as worthy. So what ends up happening in a society that no longer says that this is what fulfillment means? First, we think it broadens the concept of what a good life is. It means that you can have dedication to your career, or your studies, or simply self-improvement, and that is going to be seen as fulfilling. Whenever people look at famous scientists that never ended up getting married, people often say oh, well, that was kind of a loss on their part. They probably didn't live as good of a life. And we think you change that narrative and you allow people to broaden their concepts. But secondly, we think that it allows individuals to now prioritize themselves. We think that you are going to define yourself by your worth, by how smart you are, or by how funny you are, or things that are intrinsic to your personality, not necessarily intrinsic to your appearance. We think that you have a much better opportunity at attaining the good life when it's not something based on appearance or based on these other metrics, but on what you as an individual think is best. Proud to propose.
What I'm saying is that having a romantic relationship as the norm, soul fulfillment in your life is always perfect. We're not saying that this has no harms at all. The only thing we're saying is it is the best possible norm that a society can currently have that exists to make the largest amount of people as happy as possible, and therefore we should prefer this norm to every comparative that is likely to happen in reality. So therefore we're going to do three things. First, we're going to show that what are likely comparatives, what other norms are people likely to draw their happiness from, even if it's not their sole happiness. Secondly, why is this particular norm that we're defending such a good norm? And thirdly, some externalities, but before that, some rebuttal to opening government. Opening government gave us two things. They first said, having a friend love norm would be way cool. Essentially, if instead of a partner, I would just love people that unconditionally that I have around me anyways, like friends or family, etc. What they didn't show at this point is why this is a likely norm to happen if you cease to have the other norm. Therefore, you still have to show this. We will compare this to our imagination of how the world will look like, and also give reasons. The second is, and this is most of their the second part of their speech is, they show some harms if you have problematic narratives in society about love, like toxic masculinity, like people voting on the attractiveness of their partner or of people of other kinds of genders or whatever. What they did not show is why this is necessarily connected to having romantic love as the primary source of happiness within that society. This is a link they still need to provide. And we think that this is not only, that they not only didn't provide this, but this is actually an argument for our side. People in our world and in their world will probably still have relationships, but just because the urge to mate is really strong in humans. What that means is people will will have probably less romantic relationships, will maybe switch partners more often, or will just in general do other things that still lead to some sort of relationship. If you don't have to have the idea that this is a very strong source of fulfillment that might fulfill you for the rest of your life, then it will be less of seen as a long-term investment, and will be even more likely to be judged on those bad narratives that they set, i.e. looks.Ú I think this argument is actually on our side. Okay, let's do the comparative in this debate. What are the alternative norms that people will take if you essentially have a society where this is a less strong norm? we think that it's essentially other people that currently also see as important in their lives, but just lift it up compared to the soul fulfillment of the norm that we support. But that means it's social status, jobs, maybe even hobbies. But we particularly think that social status and job will be something that is very likely to now be the dominant norm in which people compare each other, and also from which people draw their main happiness. This is likely the case because we've seen that historically, at the time where love wasn't a very strong norm, like 300 years ago, 200 years ago, we saw that the most thing that people defined themselves through was their social status and job, and secondly, that it's so deeply entrenched in society that this will just be the norm that people shift to. We think that these are bad norms compared to love, and this is why, now I know why these are specifically bad norms. First reason is, those norms are significantly more comparable if you compare more comparable between each other. That means social status, most of the time, has an implicit ranking. Someone who's a lawyer has a better social status than someone who isn't. Also, it's easier to implicitly measure this norm than another. It's most of the time very easily detectable. If someone is driving a Porsche, they most of the time have a higher status than someone driving a Toyota. This is really, all of those harms do not apply to love or to having a romantic relationship as the soul fulfillment, because these are not as comparable. I come to that very soon. Also, the information in a lot of these things is openly available. So even if you go to hobbies, let's say playing video games online, which is a thing that many people currently do, especially in their young age, you also have very explicit ranking most of the time between children. As soon as you have a ranking, all those comparisons become a zero-sum game. If someone is better than, if you lose on a game against someone, you will lose happiness while the other one will gain happiness. It's not like both win out of this situation. And I'll compare these very soon. Also, second reason why alternative norms are bad, it's way easier to commercialize. That means sellers who explicitly sell services as hobbies, like, I don't know, paragliding or equipment, where all of these things have a massive incentive to make you feel unfulfilled if you do this, where it's really significantly harder to commercialize relationship, because the concept of relationship in itself is nothing that has an interest in getting more money. Also, for a lot of hobbies, it's just impossible to get into because it's really expensive. Like playing tennis, golf, or other things are just impossible for like most of the people within them. So if they have a strong urge in getting these, it's significantly harder. Compare this, and this is now where I show why romantic love is such a good society-wide norm, and especially to draw their primary needs from, their primary source of happiness from. And I would like to take closing if possible.
Okay, so I mean, just a lot of these things exist in the status quo. So if you don't earn enough money, you don't eat. So a lot of these incentives to and to compare yourselves, all these kind of things, are already existing.
Okay, thank you. Like, yes, you're right. They're to a certain degree already existing. But if you imagine that there's like a big stack of love that people define themselves through right now, and you take away a lot of this, then we'll define about the other measurements or the other features significantly more. This is a comparative debate, I think that's rather. Okay, why is love or a romantic relationship specifically now such a good one? A, it has close to no access barrier compared to other norms. What that means is you don't need to be really rich, you don't need to be to have other certain features. Most of the time you will find a partner that has equal features compared to you and that is likely to take you as their partner. That means compared to other norms that are just possible or sources of fulfillment like hobbies, they're only possible to be a source of fulfillment for very few people, namely those at the top, and all others suffer. And this is significantly easier. Also, you don't need to have a lot of money, which most of the people in the world don't, to buy into that norm. Also, second reason why it's a good norm, it's uncomparable or harder to compare in nature with other things. That means that most of the benefits you get and most of the fulfillment are the emotions and the intimacy of your partner. And my relationship, therefore, does not become worse when your relationship is good. What that means is that, and this is, Samuel will go on with this.
This idea of romance is more more than just how you see yourself, but this idea that you is always in relation to other people. And it is this harmful trait of codependency and always thinking of your identity in relation to those around you, and knowing that your identity is necessitated on someone else is the type of harmful behaviors that my partner talked about that was not adequately assessed on the opposition side. On opposition, they gave you a rosy picture of romantic love, and then they strawman this idea that focusing on your career or focusing on class is something that is insufficient and isn't going to be fulfilling. We are going to provide you the type of comparative where pursuing a life where you do focus on yourself not only gives you a better understanding of how to achieve the good life, but additionally enriches relationships that you have with other individuals in your life itself. Deconstruction will be interwoven. First, I want to talk about the certainty of the self and why that is a better mechanism for the good life. And second, this quest for perfection that exists only when you prioritize romantic love. First, the certainty of the self. Firstly, we would tell you that the importance of self-actualization is knowing the circumstances that you are within. We would tell you that it is far easier to know the circumstances to achieve the good life, to know what your wants, your goals, the type of things that make you happy, your hobbies, the people that you talk about, the music that you like to listen to. All of these things are far easier to achieve on our side when you focus on yourself. Why is that? Two specific reasons. First, like epistemologically, you and yourself only know the wants and desires that you absolutely need. But secondarily, we believe that it is better to prioritize the good life through only the lens of yourself because it allows for a far better, deeper understanding of who you are as a person. Given that humans are so complex and our emotions are so difficult to understand, if given that we only live an average of 75 years on this earth, it is far easier for us to use our limited time in order to deepen our understanding of the self and know how to achieve that good life. But additionally, secondly, we would tell you that romantic love blurs the self-actualization. Why is that? A couple of reasons. First, it is simply the chemical reactions when you love someone else. When you have sex with someone, when you marry someone, they make you happy because of the oxytocin that develops in your brain and developing that relationship with each other. Chemically, that means that my wanting to be with another person is not just something that I choose, but something where I chemically want them to make more dopamine for myself. The problem is that when this chemical reaction that you have with other people means that you are far easier to manipulate. So in opposition, they tell you that commercialization of hobbies and class is far easier on our side. We would rather tell you that it is far easier to manipulate people based on love because it is something that you cannot fully chemically control. Additionally, that's how you see a lot of the romanticization of love in literally every form of fiction and literature. Rom-coms are super popular. Love Actually is a great movie. People want to see other people being loved because they think that is the only conception of happiness. We don't want this to be the only narrative of people to be fulfilled. The comparative then is that when you prioritize yourself, you have the certainty of controlling your own circumstances of happiness or stress or anything, whatever they may be. Whereas on their side, you always have this uncertainty of how to make yourself happy because you never fully understand the wants and desires of another person. Given that comparative, we think that the certainty of happiness is far better on our side. But furthermore, the impacts of this are twofold. First of all, we will tell you that you get a far better, more stable life because you have more freedom to be yourself. However, when you're attached to another person, your freedom to be yourself, to understand yourself, but to even have actions and hobbies is always limited because you always have to be cognizant of another person. And we tell you that when we see the freedom of colleges to start accepting women in the 70s, we see that you had women who didn't have to tether themselves and their identity to their husband. They have the freedom and the liberty and independence to pursue their own careers, to go to college. And we saw that there are far better levels of happiness when you are able to focus on class and careers. They tell you in opposition that focusing on your class is a bad thing. We tell you that focusing on your class or your socioeconomic status or your hobbies are a better way to fulfill your own identity and to allow yourself to have simply the freedom to know yourself and to do the actions that you want. But secondly, we think that with this broadens the conception of love when you don't see that romantic love is the only key for happiness. And this is my project material. She tells you that there is familial love, that there is platonic love. There are ways where you love your friends and your family, but they don't have to necessarily mean that your identity is always contingent of like whether it makes your aunt happy or whether it makes your best friend happy. We think that allowing broader conceptions of love actually richens through these relationships. But I'll talk about that at my second point. Sure.
As soon as you link your own happiness and your own identity to achievements that you personally made, then you want to be better than others, and not everyone can be better than everyone else, meaning that there's a limited source of people who draw happiness from this and everyone else only sadness.
Right. So my response to this is that being driven by competition isn't a bad thing. I do debate because I know that I'm not going to win every single round, but it's this type of fulfillment that I get by simply even doing the action in the first place, knowing that this fulfills me and I'm not doing this because of a partner of someone else that I think that I have to please. So second, with this quest for perfection when under a romantic love. Firstly, let's talk about the evolution of relationships as they happen. They would characterize it first that there were arranged marriages that were forced and they didn't have a lack of love. And sure, that is a problem. But we saw that, around the 1950s when you have the openness of courting and people being able to date each other and actually being able to marry based on love, we saw that a lot of relationships were formed based on proximity. However, what's the thing with modern love, right? Modern love is characterized by three different things. First, it's the normalization of dissolving relationships. We see this with the increases of divorce in the developed world. Second, it is the globalization that has connected people, particularly through things like online dating and OkCupid. Third, it is dating apps that have made love far more casual. The reason why casual love is a bad thing is because, first of all, people will always strive for perfection in terms of compatibility because they have all of these access to the different mechanisms to try to find the perfect partner. But secondarily, people aren't going to settle because they're going to be putting far more effort into the chase rather than actually understanding someone for their flaws and creating deeper relationships. The comparative then is that on our side, we allow for deeper relationships with people because once you prioritize yourself, you're able to then accept and tolerate the type of relationships already in your life. Not just the love of someone you want to grab, but the love of your family, the love of your friends and your community. On your side, on opposition, there is always a question of whether I'm loved enough. We tell you, we get that certainty from yourself. Project choice.
What we get from OG so far is this notion that if I simply focus on myself, like put myself and my preferences forward, then this will be like the best thing I can do for myself. Now, the important thing here is to note that they still have yet to engage with Maria's direct challenge of how their counter-characterization of the world looks like if we abandon this principle. What we told you from the beginning of opening opposition is that there is more than one norm in society right now. Romantic love happens to be one of the strongest and therefore is in a predominant role at the moment. If you abolish this norm, other norms will still exist, and the norm that is like rank 2 on the norm list will then rise to predominance. We have given you clear and systematic reasons as to why those norms are likely focusing on your social standing and your career, and I'll get into why that is bad in a second. Okay, what else do we get from opening government? They give us this basic idea that I have like fundamental uncertainty about what others want, and therefore I'm like better at fulfilling my own needs. Now, we're a bit confused as to how that jives with their friend model, where I have like a lot of friends with which I'm supposed to have deep connections, but I have far more certainty about a greater number of friends, which I'm now supposed to have like deep, intimate relationships with. So we're not sure how that works within their own material. We also think that this uncertainty problem isn't particularly pressing, as in you can just ask other people what they want and what their preferences are, and given that they know what they want, they can simply tell you. We don't see how that is like a fundamental issue of relationships, that you can't figure out what other people want. Okay, I'll move on to my stuff now. What Marius has given you already is this idea that love as a metric of my personal success, as something that I define myself in terms of whether I achieve it or not, in terms of something that I believe will give me great fulfillment and pleasure, is something that is far less comparable than other metrics. Okay, why is that the case? We think there's 3 key reasons. A lot of love happens privately. A lot of things about either my emotional or my sexual intimate love life are things I'm unlikely to share with other people, like this debate. The reason for this is that it involves a lot of private, intimate emotions that we're unlikely to reveal to others because it's a sign of trust and a sign of great intimacy towards someone else. The second reason here is, and this thing being mostly private means that I have less knowledge about the love lives of other people and am therefore not able to say that my love life is better or my love life is worse than them. And as a result, I can't make these sort of relative statements and I can simply focus on the thing that makes me actually happy instead of getting bogged down in comparatives. Second reason, love depends on highly private and intimate emotions that we as a society accept as being very individual and non-generalizable. Insofar as that I can say that my personal love that I feel for a person is something that no one else can truly understand, no one can comprehend, but still has validity in the construct of how we as a society perceive romantic love, because my partner is my everything to me, and no one else needs to share that opinion. It can just be my opinion, and that's fine. This means that I don't have to justify my beliefs in my relationship and the happiness in my relationship with other people. Third reason, adjacent to this, is the narratives about love that we have within romantic love, within society, are absolutist rather than comparative. What does that mean? I can talk about my wife or my husband or my partner being literally the best partner in the world, and this is a fine statement within the confines of romantic love because we've accepted this sort of belief that in my relationship, this relationship is the best thing that can have happened to me. And because this isn't comparable to other people, because I can say I can have the best partner in the world even though I'm not married to Prince Harry, this is a very good thing because it disallows comparisons in the same way that would be possible in the other alternative scenarios. I'll take closing now.
So when you see your dream celebrity in their dream relationship, where they spend millions of pounds going on holidays so that they can spend time with each other, and you're working 2 jobs, 16 hours a week, is it really impossible for you to compare your relationship with them?
So 2 reasons here, 2 points on this. A, no, there is some extent of comparison. We're fully capable of conceding that. It's not that love is principally incomparable in every single aspect. However, we think it is far less comparable than the alternatives you need to defend, i.e. consumerism about the wealth of someone else. It's far easier to compare the size of the wedding rather than the personal feelings I have towards my partner. We think that works better on our side. So what are the alternatives? And we laid out 2 pretty plausible alternatives. One is social status and the other is wealth in society. We think both of those are relative metrics, as in they work on an implicit ranking. That means someone has the highest social status and other people are lower than them. Because we all recognize that and because we're aware of this ranking, we are now driven by the need for competition to improve ourselves in these rankings, which is a very biological instinct to want to garner social capital and to be the best in some aspect. The result of this is we focus more on the rankings. However, because there's only one person at the top, a lot of people will feel bad about their own position in the rankings because they will see that they're not the best, that they're worse than someone else, and they will be caught in this hedonic treadmill where they try to get ever higher, ever further, without actually being happy about their achievement. Because as soon as they reach one level of achievement, there will be someone above them, someone they can still look up to. We can see evidence for this when we look at how happiness, self-reported happiness, scales with wealth. We can see that people in the West might be slightly happier than people in developing countries, but they're not 100 or 1,000 times happier as their wealth would suggest. Because if I make more money, if I gain more social status, what this really gives me is just more even richer people to look up to. So this uncomparability is one of the reasons why we think that love is better. The other thing is that we think long-term relationships are a great idea, and it is less likely to happen under government sign. Why is that? Relationships are pretty fucking hard, and there's a lot of points at which relationships can easily break if both partners don't put in the necessary investment. However, we think that long-term relationships offer crucial benefits that they cannot gain in the same manner on their side. Because I tether myself so tightly to another person, this gives me a lot of long-term emotional, financial, and life stability, especially in like a globalized economy in which it is very likely that I might lose my job one day, that I might encounter a personal crisis in terms of health or mental health. It is crucial that I have one person that I can unconditionally depend upon. In a world in which they have only friends, which are sort of fleeting, this is less likely to happen. We have more stable and happy long-term relationships. We don't compare ourselves with other people. We focus on our own happiness.